Okay, we'll start with a really simple question. How many of you have ever needed a lawyer? A couple of you, all right. The other half, let me ask you, how many of you needed to run from a lawyer? Okay, well, the next folks, I'm delighted to introduce Eddie Hartmann, who is one of the best lawyers. In fact, he's one of the co-founders of LegalZoom. And I actually want to invite Eddie up because I think there's some especially interesting things about this industry. If we think of the education industry as one of the examples where the services have just been unbundled, think of what happens when you unbundle the services of a law firm and how many law firms are likely to be. I think we're going to see changes to industry structure that are fundamentally different, and LegalZoom is going to be one of the firms actually driving that change. So as much as we spoke this morning about what's actually happening, I think this will be a very interesting indication of what's taking place in the industry. Eddie has a bachelor's in computer science and B in anthropology, so he's actually studies the technology and the human dynamics, has a member of the California Bar, and he has an MBA from Wharton, although we won't hold that against him from MIT. It was wonderful. So with that, please do welcome Eddie Hartmann. Thank you.
I'm going to try to hold your attention while talking about problems in the legal industry with the knowledge that there are cookies right outside. So I'm going to try to move through quickly. And let me just make sure that I can actually advance here. But let me actually rephrase that problem. Instead of me talking about law, I'm going to talk to you about a 300-year-old practice in the US that is dramatically broken, that is ripe for disruption. And I'm going to make the case for you that it's the right time to introduce a marketplace, platform marketplace solution to completely transform an industry that has a TAM just for consumers and small businesses estimated at upwards of $100 billion. So forget about law, forget about how boring it is. Think 300-year-old industry, ripe for disruption, multi-$100 billion TAM. And this is the time, I think, that a platform marketplace will transform the entire industry. So first I'm going to try to make the case that the industry is right now broken and ripe for disruption. Next I'm going to go into the considerations of entering into a marketplace. And then finally I'm going to talk about what I am trying to build right now and why I think it's the right time for it. But first, I think a little bit about the business. So that is LegalZoom. I don't know how many people have ever seen LegalZoom or gone to LegalZoom, but that is our business. I think for the first 10 years of our existence, we were mainly known for those products. We were sort of the TurboTax of law. More recently, we are moving into the services business, and specifically through a platform, through a marketplace model. But when we got started, no one knew us. These days, 7 out of 10 Americans can name LegalZoom. We're the best known name in the legal business. The next best known name in the legal business is the law firm of Cage & Fish at 5% name recognition. Does anybody know the law firm of Cage & Fish? Anyone? 5% name recognition. It is the law firm from Ally McBeal. So we're 70%, they're 5%. Everybody non-fictional is less than 5%. We've helped more than 2 million Americans. That's more than people that live in Vermont and Maine. We also metric ourselves on Net Promoter Score, willingness to refer Net Promoter Score. We're at about the same level as Apple Computer and Southwest Airlines, and everybody at LegalZoom knows if you want to be promoted, focus on your Net Promoter Score, and if you want to be fired, fail to focus on your Net Promoter Score. For people who don't know, Net Promoter Score is the percentage of people, essentially, it's a little more complex than this, that would recommend you to friends and family members. So we really deeply care about quality, and that'll play into the conversation about platform. I want to create an experience that isn't merely accessible, but that offers a better quality experience, a more satisfying experience than you'd have if you just walked into a law firm. We started the company with a bunch of buddies. That's me, much younger me over there on the left, with my very good friends. We were started in 1999. This article says we're still a startup. As you can see, we are still a startup 13 years after the start of this article. It is now 16 years after we got started, and I guess we're still a startup. But we do a lot of business. About 1 in 4 businesses in the state of California get started through LegalZoom. About 1 in 6 nonprofits nationwide. A lot of the IP in the country goes through us. Normally, if I see these numbers to lawyers, they gasp because people don't realize LegalZoom is as big as it is. But we're very lucky. We've been very fortunate with the way that things have gone. However, when we got started, my partners, I think, thought that their life was going to be a little bit like this, but then it sort of turned out, like this, and some days like this. And this is an actual artist's rendition of my life in the end of the 90s, because I was an internet consultant. I knew business, I knew technology. My friends, the lawyers, were really having a miserable time. And something unusual has happened on the road to Damascus. My friends, my lawyer friends, who started the business with me, have left. Brian Liu has started a beverage company. It's a wonderful beverage company, Zenify. I'm an investor. Drink Zenify, it's great. My other partner, Brian Lee, first did a business with this woman and then did a business with this woman. We used to joke that unless you had a sex tape, you couldn't do business with Brian Lee. Then he, that's Brian. And then he started doing business with Jessica Alba. He has a wonderful company now called Honest. And if you don't know them, you should. They're really fantastic. They're in Costco now. He's doing really, really great. I've become the zealot. I named my firstborn son after Clarence Darrow, the amazing attorney from the early 1900s. I was the non-lawyer, and I have now become, this guy. I really believe that law is an amazing industry, ripe for change. Lawyers are amazing people trying to do a good thing, held back by a terrible industry. And I don't mean, the Martin Luther King kind of law. I mean everyday law. I mean everyday problems that people have. How many people in this room, show of hands, have signed a contract without reading it? How many businesses sign contracts without reading them? There's an incredible asymmetry in the power dynamic. We're supposed to be living in a society of laws. People don't believe that they have access to a lawyer, let alone the legal system, not really. So I think things have to change. But rather than just tell you that, let me show you some numbers. So the average rate in the US is $285 an hour. And let me ask you, do you do anything at all in your life where you pay a person $285 an hour and you're not insured against it and you don't know how many hours it's going to take? That's up. That is up by a considerable amount. Meanwhile, the employment of lawyers is down. Why would this happen? I mean, this is disequilibrium. Everybody who's ever taken an economics class, if people are unemployed, the wage should be going down, right? But it doesn't happen. Here's some more. The American population since the 1980s has increased by 40%. The population of lawyers has increased by 277%, right? I see, people are actually, you're not looking at each other, I am. People are like, yeah, it's crazy. Meanwhile, the ABA, this is the last stat that I had. I actually have an updated statistic. They say that in 92, 30% of Americans with a serious legal problem would seek the help of a lawyer. That went to 15%. So half the people who used to seek the help of a lawyer when they had a serious legal problem now don't. And by the way, the latest thing that we heard from the ABA, their chief economist came out and said it's now down to 8%. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, stunned looks in the. If 15% or 30% of Americans with a serious legal problem went to seek the help of a doctor, and the other 70% were like, no, I'll just bleed. That's okay, I'm fine. We'd be like, wow, that's really broken. We're down to 8% of people with serious legal problems seeking the help of a lawyer. So, wow. So why? Let's look at the problems that face consumers. We tend to think it's just price, and price is a problem. I'm going to get to that. But there are actually things that matter a lot more than price. In fact, price is on the decline. It's not that it doesn't matter. It does. But there are things that matter more, and price is mattering a little bit less to people these days. What matters more? Okay, well, the quality of the lawyer. Think about it. What do you ask for? Do you know the name of a good lawyer? How do you know if it's a good lawyer? What are the quality indicia of a lawyer? The next question is, what's the process? I just said hourly rate, but how many hours? How long will it take? When will the thing be done? These are things that you cannot ascertain. And of course, the price. Beyond that, think about the things that compel you to buy. Think about brand. Would you put your kids in a car that the interesting but somewhat crackpot inventor down the street created? Would you strap them in the back seat and go down the freeway? Or would you prefer a Honda or a Toyota or a Mercedes? Where are the brands in law? I just told you it's Cajun fish and they're not even real, right? So where are the brands in law? Where's the advertising and marketing for lawyers? Where is the convenience? Why isn't there a law firm that you can just walk into on a Saturday? And finally, where are the guarantees? Why don't lawyers show you that they're going to stand behind their work with some sort of a indication that they're not just saying it's of high quality, but they're actually going to act like it? By the way, the power asymmetry, again, the difficulty of actually hiring a lawyer to pursue another lawyer that did wrong by you is very, very difficult. Horror stories. So this is not an accidental situation. There's incredible regulatory friction in the system. The reason that you don't see lawyers advertising is because they're not allowed to. The reason that you don't see national brands is because you have to get licensed in every state. There are a number of states that actually criminalize practicing without a license. And maybe you think, well, that actually kind of makes sense. I wouldn't want someone operating on me if they weren't licensed as a surgeon. Sure, I get that. But if you go from Massachusetts into New York and you're a lawyer and you try to help somebody with a question, if you do something as simple as selecting a form, you've committed a criminal act. If you do that in New Jersey, it's punishable by a year jail time, even though you're a lawyer in other states. So there's incredible amount of regulatory friction, and this is what is behind the disequilibrium that we've seen in the previous slides. This is not just me saying this. This is backed up by many, many, many people who've researched into this. And this is actually my favorite example of regulatory friction is right here. This is SilverFlume. This is a beautiful website. This is a website that I shouldn't be telling you about because it competes with my business. In the state of Nevada, you can use this to set up a business, corporation, LLC, you name it. It's fantastic. It was set up by the Secretary of State of the state of Nevada, a guy named Ross Miller, who was democratically elected. And it used to have his picture on the front. It doesn't have his picture on the front anymore. It doesn't have his picture on the front anymore because Ross Miller, again, the democratically elected Secretary of State of Nevada, the guy who's supposed to help you set up a business in Nevada, was sued by his own state bar for creating a website that was too good and would potentially displace lawyers who wanted to help you set up a corporation in the state of Nevada. So yeah, he took his picture off. I still think it's an amazing website. Meanwhile, law firms are not serious about changing their delivery models. So what do we have? We have a situation where people face terrible disequilibrium, a lot of friction in the system, models that are running into regulatory red tape, and I'd say a clear need for a better delivery system. Let's look at lawyers for a second. So you might think that the legal profession is a great profession to go into, but every study that we've seen puts the median take-home for, the median gross for solos and small practice attorneys at about $78,000. If we know that their average hourly is $200, that means that they're working about 392 hours a year. You bring that to a weekly, that's about 8 hours a week. So think about it, you're a lawyer, you're paying for your office space, you're paying for your subscriptions to legal services, and you are billing 8 hours a week. You have 75% unfilled time. No wonder you have to charge a rate that no one can afford. Otherwise, you couldn't pay for things. But of course, you're charging a rate no one can afford. That's why you're working 8 hours. It's kind of a, you wish somebody would step in there and say, let's just reset this thing. But maybe we can, maybe with a marketplace. Furthermore, when you're running a business as a lawyer, you're doing something you're not really trained to do. You're trained to be a lawyer, you're running a business, there's debt collection, there's a myriad of little tiny things that you didn't think about in law school, but now are your problem. So what will determine whether or not this is a ripe area for a platform? Let's go into some factors. Earlier, Marshall talked about Bill Gurley, who is an amazing, amazing investor, an amazing strategist. You remember the case of Demodian, the professor at Columbia, valuing Uber, and Gurley came in and said it's worth far more because you're not thinking about the network effects. Gurley also has, skipping through my slides here, Gurley also has a checklist of 10 factors you ought to consider if you're thinking about building a marketplace. Let me just go through a few of them as they relate to the legal field. Are you providing a new experience? Well, we know what the experience is right now. It's primarily asking a friend, do you know the name of a good lawyer? What's wrong with asking a friend if they know the name of a good lawyer? Answer, how the heck do they know if it's a good lawyer? Malcolm Gladwell wrote in The Tipping Point about a guy who was the #1 rated lawyer on Keen, which was an advice site at the time. The only problem with this #1 rated lawyer is that he turned out to be 15 years old and not a lawyer. So, and yet he was the #1. So people aren't really able to assess the quality of legal work. Let me ask you the following. When will you know if the will that your lawyer wrote you is any good? It's what we call a credence good. You have to have faith that the thing is of any quality at all. So asking a friend, is that a good lawyer? Your friend, unfortunately, just doesn't know the answer to that question, no matter how they may feel about that 15-year-old that gave them advice, right? They do not know. So a marketplace could be a great new experience. This is an opportunity for technology to step in and give you an impartial rating of a lawyer's actual quality. Is it a highly fragmented area? Yes, it is highly fragmented. Again, you cannot practice across state lines. In many areas, you need to practice at a community or even a courthouse level in order to get things right. We can produce a marketplace with very little friction in terms of how you get into the marketplace. It's, again, $100 billion TAM just on the 8 to 15% of people who actually use lawyers. And could this expand the market? Well, that's the whole goal, isn't it? Fighting non-consumption. There are some big question marks. How often do people really use lawyers? We ought to use lawyers a lot more than we do. I feel like with the right platform, potentially people would use lawyers more than once a year, but it would never be like an Uber, or it shouldn't be like an Uber. I guess we could go out there committing torts and getting people to come into our marketplace more often, but that would probably be bad for business. The payment flow is an incredible problem. Most lawyers cannot accept credit cards. And so could this be a place where we step in and help people with the payment flow? Might be. Again, open questions. I don't know. And finally, a really tricky question here. Can we provide an economic advantage? Can we actually find a clearing price in this market? If we can, I think we've done an amazing thing. But again, jury's out on these questions. Let me turn to the last of Gurley's factors, and I think the most important one, which is network effect. Obviously, a network between a client and a lawyer is a great thing, and even if, unfortunately, the R got orphaned down to the next level there. But a network between a client and a lawyer is great. The test, though, of a network effect is it better for the N+1th person who comes in? Well, it's certainly good for the client with the N+1th lawyer, right? And there's different ways that this might be good. If we make the prices visible, potentially, that produces pressure on the price. And that might be good for the client. But there are other ways, too. What if we know the schedule of the lawyer? And there are two equally good lawyers with about the same price, but we can say, you know what, this lawyer has more availability to you, and your issue is time sensitive. Or this lawyer is closer to you, and you will need to come in and do an in-person consultation. How many people have ever had to take off their lunch hour to go see a lawyer, only to find out that simply getting across town ate up most of the time that you were going to use talking to him or her? So obviously, adding the N+1 lawyer is actually a very good thing. Adding the N+1th client is very good for the lawyer because this creates more work. They're only working 8 hours out of the calendar week. More clients is obviously a good thing. But what about the client-to-client network? How does the N+1th client help the clients that already exist? Here's where we feel that consumer ratings can really come in. By adding another client, you add the possibility that someone has already rated the lawyer that you want to work with, potentially on a similar matter. Or potentially even someone that is within your second or third degree network has rated the lawyer that you would like to work with. How can the N+1th lawyer help the existing lawyers in the network? This is a more subtle question. I think one that people who think about platforms tend not to think about. You know, even with LinkedIn, they're not thinking how the N+1th HR professional can help the existing HR professionals that are already consumers on the system. But here I think there's a clear tangible advantage. And it's that the quality ratings, as more lawyers engage, become more portable and more meaningful. If you are the absolute #1 lawyer on a system no other lawyer has heard of, that does not buy you much. But if you're the #1 lawyer in a system that everybody knows and uses, I think that can be quite powerful. I'll give you an actual example from we're still, I'd say, in the fledgling area, but our fledgling attempts to create this within our own company. I told you that NPS is incredibly important. It's how we measure everything that we do. Most lawyers out there, most law firms, get an NPS between 0 and 5 on a -100 to +100 scale. Okay, well, we said we can do better than that, and we did. We got between 10 and 20. But that is not nearly as good as we expect of the services that we deliver. So we said, how could we get them above 50? How could we get them to 60 or 70? The answer turned out to be quite simple. We focused them on things that consumers cared about, like calling at the right time. You don't call 5 minutes after you say you're going to call. You call when you say you're going to call. But the thing that really worked was publishing every lawyer's NPS to every other lawyer. Turns out lawyers are incredibly competitive. And when you tell them when you ask them how are you going to do, they always tell you, oh, I'm going to be the best for it. But when you actually show them how they're doing and then publish that to the other lawyers in the system, it creates a competition, which is simultaneously a way of reinforcing quality and a way of making high-quality lawyers possessed of a mark that is more valuable, a kind of currency that they can take outside of the system. So I think here we have a network effect that not only helps the obvious consumer to vendor, but actually has consumer-to-consumer network effect and vendor-to-vendor network effect. And finally, for us, the furniture of the platform, we do very, very high-volume products right now in corporations, trademarks, wills, that sort of thing. But we could not, I don't believe, get into the long tail of legal services without the dynamics that are going to be available to us through a platform. Here, lawyers can create their own content. Lawyers can create their own services. They can add to the long tail of services and products that we offer, thereby making the entire platform that much more meaningful to the legal public. But I think that there are some subtle considerations beyond that. And these are considerations that I am kind of excited out of my mind about because they're things that law firms have never been able to engage in. And let me tell you a few of them. Right now, if you are a law firm, you are a law firm, and law is what you do. You do not think about the other needs that your consumer might have. If you are setting up a business, you're setting up a business. You're helping with the partnership agreement. You're ensuring that they do their corporate minutes. But when you start a business, you have other needs as well, don't you? Can we help to capture those needs? Can we help with tax, accounting, leasing of office space, insurance? Of course we can. When two people divorce, who's thinking about the child support payments? Who's thinking about, I mean, I don't want to go to absurdium, but every Valentine's Day we say, you know, we should really give them Match.com accounts after they complete their divorce. There are needs, in other words, that go beyond the legal, that may be subtle, but they're these second-order needs that I think could be almost as valuable as the legal need in the first place. Furthermore, I would say, does this need to be a total creative destruction, or can this simply be a repositioning? I think, as you can see, in favor of a creative destruction. But when people think about the difference between MySpace and Facebook, for example, I think they tend to think of a total market grab that must have been an incredible creative innovation, when really what it was a repositioning. Instead of talking about my favorite bands on MySpace, I'm talking about whether or not I'm single on Facebook, and maybe talking about you on Facebook in an exclusive setting that people needed at first access in order to get into. So the positioning, the narrative of the platform is incredibly important to me. Will the technology be useful? I sincerely hope so. Will the ability to access these reliable metrics of lawyer quality, will that be helpful? I sincerely hope so. But we should not ignore the narrative of the platform. Is it just a replacement for the yellow pages? Or is it actually a place that gives you a solid recommendation, the way a friend would, but better than a friend? Is it a place where potentially you can find these second-order needs fulfilled? Is it a place where potentially you can do things like have a secure conversation with your lawyer, whereas by any other means available to you, text message, email, something might be left lying around when you didn't want it left lying around? So we're thinking hard about the positioning as well as the creative destruction innovation itself. So just to sum up, because again, there are cookies. The current way of doing things is badly broken, and it's broken because of friction. There's a wonderful professor at University of Vermont named Oliver Goodenough. He says, the problems with legal, bless you, the problems with legal are often looked on as bugs. They are not bugs. They are features in a system. When you deliberately build in the need for state-by-state licensing, when you deliberately say lawyers cannot advertise, at least freely, the result cannot be looked on as a bug but a feature. The problem is it is hoist by its own petard. It is a system that has broken itself. So when we think about clients, they cannot figure out who to trust nor how much they should pay. And when we think about the possibility of creating a marketplace, we think finally a way to potentially resolve those problems, bring together lawyers who are desperate for supply, bring together clients who are desperate for legal help, and finally hit that clearing place, that equilibrium. So I'm very excited about the future. And with that, if there are any questions.
Yes, hi, this is Jeff Parker. So I do have one question, and I'm cognizant that Dave is looking at me and there's coffee and cookies outside. But so you've positioned this as a way of providing not only kind of legal services and direct legal assistance to the lawyers, but also going beyond that. And for example, setting up back office support, billing services, and things like that.
Yes.
So my question is, are you building that out yourself, or are you also operating in an open platform sense to try to partner with people who have a pretty deep expertise in that? And sort of how do you think about that partner combination, if you will, or are you trying to go more vertical?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I think to be a good husband of corporate resources, you have to recognize what you can do and what you can't do. What we must do is insist on a level of lawyer quality. What we must do is police our network, our platform. What we must do is stand behind the customer and remedy the asymmetry of power. But when it comes to these other things, these second order needs, as you point out, I think we would be foolish to try to do them ourselves. And instead, what we intend to do is create an open ecosystem where we bring in great providers, and it's, quick to fire. If they're not doing right by our customer base, we get rid of them, and we get rid of them rapidly. But we would be, I think, shortchanging our customers to make them wait for us to build all of that ourselves. And we would do far better to say, spot the needs, fill it quickly. Cool.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.